Hi, I'm James. I'm one of the 3D artists here at Rivet Games. I'm part of the environmental team currently working on the Gotthardbahn. Part of my job here at Rivet as the environmental team is building the stations. It's quite a long process that involves many stages. This is the station in its final stages before being exported to the game. When these stations are started, we were initially provided with just the platforms and the track, and we line this up with Google Maps to make sure that everything's to scale and accurate to the actual station. And then using that as our basis, we begin one by one building the actual unique buildings of the station. Here is the reference file I had for all the different buildings at this particular station. This is what the model would look like with just the buildings. Usually we do the buildings first, we one by one texture them and place them into the environment, and then after that stage is done, we would put our additional details such as our staircases and then things such as the canopies. Finally, we would put in the finishing touches such as the lampposts, the signage, which is key to get that right. These are called clutter, but in reality that makes it sound like it's rubbish, but it's not. These are usually just kind of unique assets that are quite iconic to the route, so such as a vending machine or a specific type of bench or notice board that you would see on, in this case, the Gotthardbahn. And then once everything's put together, we would go and export this and check it in the game engine. So here is the station in 3ds Max, and here is it in the game engine, where we can fly around and check for any errors or mistakes before it's put into the route for the route builders. And there's areas where it appears to be kind of barren or sparse, so at the moment this is just a sort of blank section of cement, but if you were to look on the reference, for example, the actual station, this is quite populated with cars and a bit of greenery and a little shop, but then this would be left up to the route builders when they're putting together the station in its final stages. Here we have the actual Biaska station as part of the route. Now this area is still unfinished, but it gives you a better sense of the station as a place in the world rather than just an isolated section of track. So it gives you a better idea of how it would look in the final product. So when the route builders would reach this section of track, they would then take these areas, fill them in with the proper level of detail before the route's finalised. Another part of my job is to make generic building assets to populate the route, where these can be used as many times as possible, and because they have to be used so often, they have to be as versatile as can be. These are all using the exact same base model, but they have different colour palettes, so even if they're next to each other, you may not be able to tell the difference. In cases such as this, we were provided a reference image that said to take the front section of one building and make it the back section of another. This building has two fronts, but you would never know that because you're only seeing it from one side, and it's just so we can get the most from each model, representations of the kind of buildings and the kind of colours you'd find in that particular area. A building can be a house, it could be a hotel, and one way to further their usage is to make small little clutter assets such as this beer sign, which the route builders can stick onto the individual houses, as well as there's other versions of, say, a hotel, a cafe. So what would be in one part of the route a house, it could be further down the line, the same building could become a bar very easily by sticking on these kind of assets such as this beer sign or this cafe sign, which again, these are very generic assets, but they can use the entire length of the railway, as well as making generic assets such as houses that could be used to populate the scene anywhere. We also in some cases have to make iconic assets. These are just one-off assets that would only be used in one section, a bit like how a station and its buildings would only be used once, such as here is the church at Wasson, which is actually seen I think 3 different times from 3 different angles as part of the route, and it's very iconic to the Gotthardbahn. So what we would do for a building such as this is trying to find as many references as possible, and people have model buildings for those routes, and so in a case such as this, there's a model railway version of the Wasson Church, which I found particularly helpful. For many of our fans, Train Simulator isn't just limited to the trains, it is a virtual train set, and that includes the buildings itself. So there's many comparisons that can be drawn to the environmental side as well as the train side. So the buildings are just as collectible and just as iconic as the trains themselves to each of the routes. To now be working here to make little environments houses, props. It's kind of like a dream job. It's always what I enjoyed as a kid and as a teenager, and now to actually finally be able to do it as a career is fantastic.